all our listeners should care about provincial politics. We need to put pressure not only on the big government in Ottawa that's, screwing over our resources and making life more expensive for us, but also focus on our provincial politicians who are doing the same bloody thing.
This is the Taxpayers Federation podcast where we are fighting for lower taxes, less waste, and more accountable government. I'm Chris Sims. I'm the Alberta Director for the CTF. I'm joined by three of my good friends, Gage, Devon, and Carson. Gentlemen, we've got a special report here, and that is the report card. Let's just be honest. Gage did a ton of work. He created basically the report cards for finance ministers across Canada, and we gave them grades. And it's based on things like how much debt are you piling on, what are your tax cuts looking like, how are those interest payments treating you, that sort of stuff. So we wanted to go around the horn here to give you guys some examples of what your provincial governments are doing. Provincial. You know, it's an Olympic sport. It's an understandable thing to beat up on Ottawa, but it's also easy. We have to make sure that our home fires are burning in the right direction here. So Gage, who won? If we're looking at this as a competition, who won for finance ministers?
Yeah, so one is kind of a strong word, as we'll get into it. Most provinces around the country are still saddling their taxpayers with debt and not providing nearly enough tax relief. But of the finance ministers this year, Saskatchewan's Jim Ryder performed the best around the country, earning a B+. And that comes mainly from a couple of things. The government has some income tax cuts, some education property tax cuts that are going to be able to save taxpayers a pretty good amount of money, as well as the Saskatchewan government is increasing spending at a much lower rate than some other provinces. But again, they're talking about the Saskatchewan government did the best. They're still planning on piling almost $2.4 billion more in debt this year compared to last year's budget. So that's what we have for a winner.
Okay, I'll take that as a winner. For folks who are wondering who the runner-up is, Alberta is the runner-up. So our finance minister, Nate Horner, earned a B. So not a B+, but a B for his efforts, mainly because we did get a big old tax cut. So our income tax was dropped from the lowest tax bracket from 10% down to 8% for the first $60,000 worth of earnings. In normal people talk, that'll save you about $1,500-ish bucks per family, two-person working family. That's nothing to sneeze at. So that was very good. However, you mentioned piling onto the debt. Horner is adding more than $5 billion onto the Alberta debt. So the debt clock is now going up again, which is the wrong direction. We need to balance the budget. They need to stop piling on the debt because we're all paying the interest payments on this thing. And frankly, if Alberta isn't the sober one at the party or the adult in the room, I don't know about the rest of you. Speaking of being sober at the party, let's head over to Atlantic Canada. Hey, Devon.
Hey.
I don't need you to go through all, 16 and a half provinces or whatever you guys have out there. But how are you guys doing, generally speaking, when it comes to finances?
Yeah, so what you see out here in Atlantic Canada is almost the tale of two cities. You have two provinces which are doing far from perfect, but quite well. And then you have two provinces that are going in the wrong direction completely. So the two provinces that we're seeing going in the right direction are Nova Scotia and Prince Edward Island. And Nova Scotia actually placed third in our rankings this year with a C+ rating. That's Minister John Lohr, in his first budget as finance minister, delivered meaningful tax relief for Nova Scotians. This includes a 1% HST cut in Nova Scotia, which makes Nova Scotia have the lowest HST rate in all of Atlantic Canada. We saw inflation-based adjustments to all income tax brackets and an increase in the personal exemption for income tax by $2,000, which, again, normal person talk means more money you earn before you have to pay income taxes. And on top of that, there were cuts to small business tax rate, a 1% reduction from 2.5% to 1.5%. And a increase in the small business threshold by $200,000. Again, what that means is a business can earn more money before they have to pay a higher tax rate. So PEI did similar cuts without the HST cut, but overall Nova Scotia is heading in the right direction on tax relief. However, similar to what you're saying, Gage, and what you've said, Chris, it's far from perfect, and we're seeing a huge spending issue. This year alone, the debt in Nova Scotia will increase by $2.2 billion. So Minister Lohr, in his first budget, has made good strides in Nova Scotia, but we need to go a lot further than that. And that means focus on stop racking up debt and wasting hundreds of $millions on debt interest payments.
$2 billion onto the debt?
Yes, absolutely. And that's if you want to just look at the per person numbers, that's about $20,000 per person going in on the debt this year. So it's crazy. I know, Carson, we'll probably get to you in a second when we talk about 2.2 billion. It looks small compared to BC, but you have to think about the small population of Nova Scotia, about 1 million people. So it's huge numbers for us out east.
Yeah, just keep it in mind, folks, when you're thinking about a small province like Nova Scotia. Its entire population is about the general size of the city of Ottawa, like including the surrounding areas of its municipality. Like, to add 2 billion on when you've only got about 1 million people, that's wincy. Okay. Carson, every time I talk to you about my home province of British Columbia, you surprise me again with how much, seriously, surprise me with how much that government is wasting and spending and how much it's piling onto the debt. So I'm just going to brace myself emotionally. How are you guys doing in BC?
Well, folks at home, if you've got family, if you've got friends in BC right now, you should pick up the phone and call them to make sure they are okay. Because what our government is doing here in beautiful British Columbia is just wild, Chris. Now, for comparison, did I hear you say the Alberta government is increasing its debt by about $5 billion this year?
5.2, yeah.
Yeah, so 5.2 billion, that's as much as we're paying on interest on our debt this year alone. We're paying 5.2 billion just on interest on our provincial debt, which shakes out to just under $1,000 per British Columbian this year. Now, overall, our finance minister got a D minus. Now, for the eagle-eyed listeners at home, you might remember that BC did away with letter grades this time last year. So in BC language, our finance minister is emerging, but hasn't met the mark yet. Yeah, she's sitting at a D minus because we are racking up just crazy, like mind-melting amounts of debt. $23.6 billion of new debt this year alone. By the end of this year, every single British Columbian man, woman, child, baby born tomorrow will owe the equivalent of $27,000. That's a whole heck of a lot of money, folks. Now,
how much this year?
This year alone, $23.6 billion brand new debt. 23.6 billion. It is mind-melting the amount of reckless borrowing that David Eby and our finance minister are doing and throwing on that taxpayer credit card.
That's just awful. And to paint a picture, anybody who's been to BC can see this. You don't need to have lived there, or anybody who's like read a book on the place. It's not as if BC is some tiny have-not province that doesn't have any resources to work with and, has a, really elderly, sick population. You know what I mean? Like, not to excuse going into debt regardless. But British Columbia is literally sitting on a gold mine.
Oh, it's not just gold, Chris. We've got all those petroleum resources up in the Peace River region. We're sitting on some of the best timber forests in the whole world. We've got those rare earth minerals. We've got gold. We've got copper. We are sitting on one of the wealthiest pieces of land, not just in Canada, not just in North America, but in the whole wide world. And Dave Eby has somehow turned that golden goose into a massive debtor. And it just doesn't make sense. Now, Chris, when you lived in BC, you'll remember this. We were topping the charts. We had a fairly small government.
Yep.
They weren't borrowing beyond their means. The system was more or less working. Well, just two premiers, David Eby and John Horgan, blew up that decades-long political consensus in British Columbia for good, responsible government. They torpedoed it. It is sitting at the bottom of the Salish Sea right now. So for all those reasons, our finance minister got a D minus. Now, the one saving grace that stopped our finance minister from getting that big old F, which is failure, I think, even still in this new BC grading
You
system.
just triggered everyone in BC with a report card, but go on.
I know they're sitting there shuddering hearing these letter grades. But credit where it's due, this government did eliminate the consumer carbon tax in British Columbia after Ottawa did it. They took their sweet time, but they did give us those carbon tax savings. Now, what they didn't do is give us the $1,000 per family income tax cut that David Eby was harping on about all throughout the provincial election. Time and time and time again, he said he was going to cut our income taxes. But when I went to the budget lockup and got this big old budget, do you think there was any income tax in there, folks? Nowhere to be found, unfortunately. So with the balance of those things, our finance minister got a big old D minus.
Okay.
Well, Carson, I'll try to do you one worse on that one. If we go swing on back to Manitoba, just
Please.
like your tragic story in British Columbia there, they're increasing the debt. They're spending too much money. Debt interest payments in Manitoba are the second highest per person in the country. But they didn't just fail to make a tax cut in Manitoba. They decided to hike taxes instead, one of the only governments in the country to do it in their budget. But they did it in the most sneaky way possible, which I think is why it's most important to highlight. The Manitoba government brought back bracket creep this year. So that means is like Devin was talking about earlier with indexing tax brackets, the Manitoba government is going to stop indexing income tax brackets this year. So that means you get yourself a cost of living pay raise at your job. So you're making more money on paper, but you can't actually afford to buy more because prices at the grocery store have also went up. Instead of the government helping you out and also indexing its tax brackets by inflation, it's going to wait for inflation to bump you up into a higher tax bracket and make you pay more in taxes. And it's so sneaky because the premier, the finance minister, doesn't have to stand up in the legislature in Winnipeg and say, I want to raise taxes. They just stop indexing and wait for inflation to do the work for them and cash in on more of your taxpayer dollars. And I think that's why, to get to the letter grade, we gave Manitoba that F mark.
Amazing. I think a good way to explain it, correct me if I'm wrong, with, what do we call that? Bracket creep? God, I hate that term. So the way we can look at it, correct me if I'm wrong, is imagine that your income based on the rate of inflation / cost of living is a boat, okay, on the surface of the water, okay? Typically, if you index the tax rates, it should stay at the same level. It should float with it, meaning you aren't getting punished. But in this case, what Manitoba is doing is, no, it's anchoring it down here, even though, right, your income is raising on the surface, and that's going to sink you, is how I would always describe it. So you're basically spending more money in taxes, even though you can't tell exactly why, which is a sneaky part of it here. Now, I'm just going to ask the Pollyanna childish question. Does the government know what it's doing, Gage? Are they just making an oopsie mistake here?
Well, the government knows exactly what it's doing, but it's hoping that taxpayers won't find out. When I was in the budget lockup, like Carson there, it only mentioned bracket creep on one page at the back of the budget, and it wasn't present at all in the minister's speech. People only started talking about it after us taxpayers got out of the lockup and started raising the alarm about this sneaky tax hike. The government was hoping its best that no one would notice, but taxpayers noticed, and now that's why Manitoba's getting that F.
Good job, Gage. That's why you need people in the lockup. You need that Rottweiler sniffing around and looking for that. Devin, I think it's important to go over some of these sometimes because I think it's easy to participate in the federal sport of everybody get mad at Ottawa, which they definitely have a lot of reasons to do. But can you just describe a little bit of the importance of keeping an eye on the home fires and making sure that, our finances are in order in provincial levels?
Absolutely. And Newfoundland and Labrador, my home province where I am right now, we have a long history of fighting with Ottawa. And, I think that's a sentiment shared by the province represented, or most of the provinces represented on this podcast today. It's appropriate and somewhat natural to be skeptical of an Ottawa that, federal government that tends to ignore certain provinces or tends to put certain provinces against each other. However, Ottawa can only impacts one element of your life. The Constitution of Canada, since we started as a country, divided powers between a federal government and a provincial government. And even though sometimes the federal government tends to encroach on our provincial rights, there's still a lot of responsibility amongst our provincial politicians, and they dictate a lot of the ways we live our lives. So I think it's super important that we pay attention to what our provincial government's doing. Take Newfoundland and Labrador. Right now, our government is trying to sue the federal government for more equalization money, and Carson knows as well because we've done podcasts on it before. Newfoundland and Labrador is really trying to focus on, raising the flag against Ottawa to get more money, which really just means collect more tax dollars from other provinces. But what Newfoundland and Labrador is doing at the exact same time is putting themselves into an economic crisis that is no one's fault but their own. Minister Siobhan Coady, the finance minister of Newfoundland and Labrador for many years now, also got an F on the finance minister report card, just like Gage was describing happened in Manitoba. We're now in a year where she again, after years and years, she's been doing this every year, has promised to stop racking up government debt to balance the budget. Again, we're seeing that not happen. Instead, total provincial debt will increase to $19.4 billion this year, which is about $36,000 per person in Newfoundland and Labrador, which means the debt per person is the highest in the country here in Newfoundland and Labrador. And if you look at just debt interest payments, it's about $1.1 billion this year. But again, you look at Newfoundland and Labrador's small population, about 550,000 people, that works out to about $2,100 per person being used to service government interest. So that's, again, the highest in the country. This is money that could be used to fund essential services or could be returned to people in the form of tax cuts. Instead, that money is going to big banks and bondholders as Newfoundlanders and Labradorian families struggle. And you think about the Newfoundland and Labrador family or the family anywhere in this country, they all have to live within their means. They don't have this big government credit card to keep racking up debt. And instead, the provincial government, under the leadership or under the guidance of Finance Minister Siobhan Coady, is taking out more and more huge, irresponsible loans. This has to change. And that's why Newfoundland and Labrador got an F on the finance minister's report card this year. And on top of that, this budget did nothing to lower taxes. Despite years of inflation, we have the threat now of U.S. tariffs. This budget did nothing to make life more affordable for Newfoundlanders and Labradorians. And the funny thing we're changing war stories about these budget lockups. And for folks listening, a budget lockup is essentially where stakeholders, such as taxpayer advocates like ourselves, but also, your board of trade or your local school district, they have an opportunity to go in and hear from the finance minister, receive the documents on the budget before it becomes public. Normally, just an hour or so before the budget goes public, we have an opportunity to review the documents and ask questions to bureaucrats who designed the bloody thing. And as Carson's shown, they're not small. We were in the lockup, and on one of the front pages in the Newfoundland and Labrador budget was in big letters, no tax increases this year. Folks, that is not good enough. We need to demand more from our politicians than keeping things the same. We need lower taxes in this country and less money being wasted on big government interest payments. So I think that's the moral of the story for Newfoundland and Labrador, but also the moral of the story for why all our listeners should care about provincial politics. We need to put pressure not only on the big government in Ottawa that's, screwing over our resources and making life more expensive for us, but also focus on our provincial politicians who are doing the same bloody thing. So that's, I think, the key reason we need to put pressure on provincial politicians and pay attention to what is going on at home as well.
Amen. I just wrote an op-ed about Premier Danielle Smith, who is doing a bang-up job fighting the forces in Ottawa and trying to interpret whatever circus is coming out of Washington, D.C. today. So as of right now, yeah, she's trying to stay on top of that. Full marks. That's great. But like Sarah Connor, okay, who's fighting the big fight, what would have happened in T2 if she goes back to the bunker and there's no ammo there? What would have happened if she didn't have all the stuff ready to go, if the prep and the homework hadn't been done? And that is why we get back to Fortress Alberta. Fortress Alberta has to be a fiscal stronghold, guys. And if we are paying $8 million a day in provincial debt interest, that's not okay. We are spending more than twice the amount on debt interest than we are on emergency services. Like, we could pay 14,000 cops plus 14,000 paramedics for the year based on what we're spending on provincial debt interest. So this is why, and again, our government keeps growing, okay? We've got people threatening to strike right now. We have, look at the services you're getting at healthcare, right? All the government just keeps expanding. So you can't just put on a blue jersey and say that things are working out fine. No, she's got to be tough at home too. She has to tell the government union bosses, no, the purse strings are getting pulled tight here. We're not doing this anymore. Carson, you are in one of the most expensive places to live on planet Earth. And we get a lot of email from people who are really struggling to make ends meet. And by that, we mean pay the basics on their bills, like keep the lights on. Right? Can you give people some encouragement here? Like, are you seeing any cracks in the armor where the NDP government or maybe the opposition is pushing them to do this to get back to the black, to stop, you know?
Absolutely, Chris. And it's not just our provincial governments here in BC that we're getting absolutely ripped off by. It's also local governments, our regional districts, our municipalities like the city of Vancouver, where I'm sitting recording this right now. But yeah, taxpayers are making major headway. And let me give you just a few examples. Chris, when I started this job, I had a press conference at the BC legislature where I was calling on then Premier Horgan to axe the carbon tax. And journalists laughed at me at that press conference for daring to suggest that the carbon tax might be a bad policy. But you know what? 3 years later, BC's carbon tax is in the dustbin of history. It is gone because of taxpayer advocacy, because of our tax fighting army putting so much pressure on Premier David Eby and on the government. Another example with our local governments. Just 2 weeks ago, I was in Victoria hand delivering more than 10,000 signatures on a petition calling on the province to bring back a dedicated watchdog for municipalities. That was tabled in the legislature by opposition leader, by the leader of the BC Conservative Party, John Hastad. So the chinks in the unaccountable, big spending, big taxing armor are showing loud and clear to taxpayers. When we work together, when we speak with one voice and tell politicians, no, enough is enough, we are getting phenomenal wins, Chris. And debt interest, this is the same. We need to keep the pressure ratcheted up on our provincial government. We need to make sure the taxpayer army knows what's going on, has the information they need to fight this stuff, because this is so important. But yeah, there's hope, guys. We are getting wins. The wins are going to keep on rolling in. We just need to keep holding the politicians' feet to the fire over the hundreds of billions of dollars they're borrowing across the country.
If we keep hitting them in the same spot, I find that is what really loosens it up and makes it win. It's like chopping down a tree, right? If you've got an axe and you're just chopping up and down the trunk willy-nilly and you're not focusing on one place, it's going to take you all day and you might never get that thing down. Whereas if you concentrate your efforts on landing that blade exactly where it was the second ago, you're going to chop that tree down. So this is how we fight at the Taxpayers Federation and get these wins. Gage, I'll leave the closing to you for now. Why is it important to do these sorts of report cards? Like, I personally find it easier to understand because I don't have a background in calculus, right? So I think it's important for normal people and for journalists to be able to consume these sorts of reports. Are you getting good response to this?
Yeah, so far everybody's looking at it. It makes it really easy for taxpayers around the country to look in an easy way, like a letter grade, to find out how their provincial finance ministers are doing. And as all of you guys have mentioned here, it's fun to poke fun at Ottawa all the time, but that's only half the battle. If provincial governments, like they are continuing to hike taxes, increase debt, and waste more money on debt interest payments. That's why we think it's so important to highlight what's going on at provincial level. So while we couldn't touch on all of the provinces today, if anyone's listening wants to find out what their province is doing, head on over to taxpayer.com, check out the finance minister report card that'll be listed on there, find out what your finance minister is doing, and then maybe send an email to that finance minister and tell them to do better next time.
Amen. That's exactly right. Gentlemen, thank you so much for your time today. It's really important. Gage, thank you for your work on this. Everybody appreciates this, and it's a good tool of accountability to hold politicians' feet to the fire. Also, I'll put it this way. Even if you like your provincial government, by putting out reports like this, it gives them more tools too. So the next time they're doing a budget and they've got all these government unions coming in cap in hand saying you need to hire more, you need to spend more, we need more money, it gives them the tools to say, you know what? No, we can't do this. And this is exactly why. Because we can't be spending more on debt interest than we are on our own public safety ministry. This is nonsense. So Gage is absolutely right. Head over to our website, taxpayer.com, find the report there, look up your own province, and pick up the phone, make a call, send an email to your own provincial government. That's how we're helping you fight for taxpayers.